Now, the house builder Taylor Wimpey has been accused of failing to keep its promise to help thousands of homeowners who were sold leasehold homes with controversial clauses that see their ground rent doubling every 10 years. The row comes as MPs are increasing their scrutiny of the sale of leasehold houses and the subsequent sale of the freeholds of those properties onto other investors. The government's currently considering changes to the leasehold system. In March, the Prime Minister herself, Theresa May, said she couldn't see why new homes were not sold with the freehold. Tony Bonsignore is here.
Yes, Paul. So most of us are familiar with the idea of leasehold flats, where you buy the building and the freeholder owns the land and then charges a rent every year. But in recent years, the sale of leasehold houses has become more popular, especially by developers selling new homes. Now, their argument is that it makes the house cheaper for the buyer. In any case, it's all laid out up front in the contract. But buyers of many Taylor Wimpey homes have claimed that not only were their freeholds sold onto investors without their knowledge, but that their contracts contain clauses which will see their ground rents climb very sharply in the future. Lindsay Lloyd from Cheshire bought her Taylor Wimpey family home in 2009 for £145,000. She says she was happy to buy it leasehold with a view to buying the freehold later.
How we understood it to be was that Taylor Wimpey owned the land. We owned the house on top of it, and in return we paid them £175 a year. And in return we got a park, the roads were surfaced, street lights went up, green spaces were put in.
Well, 2 years ago, Lindsay says she was finally in the financial position to buy her freehold. But when she inquired, she was shocked at what she was told.
In March 2016, we rang to ask for a purchase price of the freehold. And that's when they stated that it wasn't for sale and that it was a lucrative investment because the ground rent doubled every 10 years and didn't cap until it reached £2,800 a year.
So, in fact, Lindsay had inadvertently signed up to a so-called doubling ground rent clause. And Taylor Wimpey had also sold on her freehold and the right to collect that ground rent to an investor some years earlier. She says she had no idea about any of this.
It's just such a massive amount of money that we're going to pay them. That house is our son's inheritance.
Who do you blame for what's happened?
Taylor Wimpey.
Do you regret not reading the contract more closely?
I was 22. I'd never bought a house. It is full of legal jargon. The rent increases are spread over 3 separate pages of the lease. I thought I did the best I could do with the information and the understanding that I had.
Well, Lindsay's is not an isolated case, and in April, Taylor Wimpey bowed to public pressure and announced it was setting aside £130 million to help affected customers, having already promised to stop selling leasehold houses. It was hailed at the time as a victory for leaseholders, but some, like Lindsay, have since become disillusioned, especially when it became clear that there wouldn't be a quick resolution and that they weren't getting their freeholds. Lindsay says that when she asked her freeholder 3 weeks ago, it still hadn't been contacted by Taylor Wimpey, and her ground rent has now already doubled for the first time, which will potentially cost her thousands over the years.
So why the delay, Tony?
Well, what Taylor Wimpey is not doing is directly compensating leaseholders. Instead, it's asking the current freeholders to vary their contracts so ground rents increase by inflation rather than doubling every 10 years. But of course, to persuade the freeholders to do that, Taylor Wimpey needs to agree compensation with them because they're giving up a lot of future income, and that's clearly not proving easy. Taylor Wimpey told me in a statement that negotiations were ongoing, but that they were complex and would take time. But they didn't want to be interviewed, and I didn't get an answer about what would happen to cases like Lindsay's, where the ground rent has already doubled.
So delays, but once the deal is done, will that be the end of it?
No. The deal doesn't cover houses bought in the second-hand market. And then there are all the other charges that the new freeholder now levies for everything from wanting to buy the freehold to adding a conservatory. And that's not just a problem for Taylor Wimpey homeowners. It's a problem for other buyers of leasehold houses from a range of builders. Katie Kendricks bought her 4-bedroom home from Bellway, Leasehold, in 2014. She says she always intended to buy the freehold, but when she inquired about it last year, she discovered it had been sold.
The price to purchase my freehold now has gone from the £2,000 to £4,000 up to £13,500.
Why do you want the freehold?
I want the freehold because I didn't want to live in a leasehold house. I wanted to have something to leave to my children. But another reason why I need to buy the freehold now, more so than ever, is because I want to extend, and Bellway would have let me extend this property for £300 permission fee. The new freeholder now wants £2,600 for permission to put an extension on.
Well, Bellway told me that they sell leasehold houses to bring down the price and that everything is spelled out in the contract and that they only sell on freeholds to reputable investors. They also say there's a legal mechanism for leaseholders to buy their homes, which is what Katie and Lindsay are now trying to do. It's called enfranchisement, but it's a lengthy and costly process. Katie's also set up a national campaign group to highlight cases like hers.
But shouldn't the solicitors or the conveyancers or indeed the lenders have picked this up?
Yes, you would think so, but they clearly didn't in many cases. Now, I spoke to the top 10 mortgage lenders and found there was no consistent lending policy. Some, though, have tightened their leasehold criteria, which is worrying leasehold homeowners. Legal firms, too, are currently considering ways of making the buying process more transparent. They say they do tell people about possible problems, but often it's too late in the buying process.
So, Tony, who's profiting from all of this?
Well, leasehold homeowners have told me it's very difficult to find out. One MP, Labour's Justin Madders, has promised to spend his summer trying to unpick the financial relationships behind it all.
What we've been able to discern so far from company records is that these properties have been bundled up into small batches of 20 or so houses, sold on to what look like shelf companies, and then sort of passed around at various times. And the names of the directors do appear to be fairly similar and possibly connected. So we know, for example, that Will Astor has interest in some of these properties. We know that there's an awful lot of serious investment gone into them because they are obviously a very attractive thing to invest in for a lot of people. But what we're not clear on is ultimately, once you wipe away the cobwebs of company law, who is actually getting the money, who is benefiting from these, and where, more importantly, are they based? Are they actually based within the UK and therefore subject to UK legislation and tax law?
Well, I did manage to speak to a spokesman for one of the biggest investors in ground rents, Long Harbour Investors, founded and managed by William Astor, who you heard mentioned there by Justin Madders. Long Harbour manages Katie Kendrick's freehold, among others, and describes itself as an investment manager working for big institutional investors like insurers and pension companies. It does this through what are called special purpose vehicles, all called in this case Adriatic. That's the name leaseholders tend to see. It says it does use offshore arrangements in the Channel Islands, but that's not done, it says, for tax advantaged. I asked for an interview, but they declined. The spokesman told me that Long Harbour is a private commercial concern, but there is plenty of information available on its website.
Thanks, Tony. And I should add, these problems do not happen in Scotland, where freehold is always sold with the house.